Hi, everyone. It's 5:02, but no other board members are here, so we're just waiting for them to be here. Thank you. Good evening again. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. The majority of our board members are here, and I assume that Dr. Gonzalez will be joining us soon. So we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to New Mexico flag and the acknowledgement of tribal land. Thank you very much. Next is the approval of the agenda. Do we need to make any changes?
No changes this evening, Board President Bozay.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, introduction of the interpreter, please.
Para asistencia de traducción en español, el señor Lucero te ayudará.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone signed up for public forum today?
Dr. Neil Weaver will take us through public forum this evening.
Good evening. Board President, member of the board, Superintendent Chavez. We have one person who's signed up. I'll go through the ground rules first. Public forum includes online and/or virtual participation as needed, as well as in-person comments when the board holds in-person meetings. Please listen and speak with respect. No uncivil conduct will be permitted. Please do not discuss any specific student who is not your own. No sharing of time. Self-monitor and observe the three-minute time limit. I will give you a 30-second warning when your time is almost up. Public commentary and dialogue are allowed only during the public forum, not throughout the meeting. Please search for answers on common ground. You may speak on any topic, whether it is on the agenda or not. Your input will be taken into consideration. Please be advised that the board may discuss your issue during the meeting, but by law, the board cannot take action on items that are not on the agenda. Please do not discuss employee matters, which may result in disciplinary action. Instead, notify the employee's supervisor, the Human Resources Department, or the superintendent. And our one public comment tonight was sent in via email. It is from Jennifer Warren, who states, "Hello, and thank you for the recent email regarding the finance meeting. I am a first grade teacher and am writing for a few reasons. 1, to express disappointment over the fact that we were not given an opportunity to give ideas for how to address the additional time that has been added to the 23-24 school year calendar. We would have been very creative. 2, when will we know our salaries for next year? With the additional days and times, they should reflect an increase as well as the overall 6% promised by the governor. 3, at our school, many classes in K and 1 are over capacity this year, and yet we have been told that there are no plans in the budget to add an additional first grade classroom. We all know that smaller class sizes improve results, particularly in the formative years. We hope that money can be set aside for this. Thank you for your time. And that concludes public forum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weaver. Now on to the meat of the night, the presentation on the 2024 budget. Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President Bozay, members of the board, team. Thank you for joining us tonight. And again, at the study session, we invited many more colleagues of ours to be in attendance just to answer questions that you may have as a board. So as you see many more individuals in the audience, it's for that purpose. So again, this discussion tonight is really about framing what the budget could look like. Not what the budget is, but what it could look like. It's proposed. We're still waiting for a lot of information to come from the state, such as award letters, grants, some of the information that we need in order to provide you guys with a proposed balanced budget for an upcoming meeting. So again, just wanted to make it very clear that this is not the budget that you guys would be presented for approval, because you guys need input. You guys need to talk about board priorities, some of the issues that are going on around the district, such as declining enrollment and things of that nature. But again, this is a proposed budget. We should have probably put that at the top, but a proposed budget to start the framework for us to go back, scrub it, come back to a future board meeting with a balanced budget for you guys to review for approval. We still have a little over a month before our due date for our budgets asked by the PED. So again, this is just an early start to the process of providing a balanced budget for the board to review at an upcoming board meeting. So again, it's just a framework, it's a proposal, and we'll start going through this. So you see the team here. All of us have parts in it. We're here to support. We're here to answer questions of the board. And so with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. With us tonight, taking us through the proposed presentation is our CFO, Mr. Robert Martinez. And again, we still have many more individuals that will chime in. If you guys have questions, it's up to the pleasure of the board. If you guys want us to go through the presentation, ask questions at the end, or if you wanted to just go through and kind of have a dialogue as we move through the slides.
Board members, what would your preference be? To hear the whole presentation and ask questions at the end, as we often do with presentations, or would you prefer to stop and talk about it along the way? Yes.
I think just given that we're in a study session rather than a full board meeting, I think it would be helpful if we could discuss along the way. And I know we'll probably have questions that will be addressed in later slides, but I think it would be helpful for us to be able to discuss as board members and obviously with staff as we move through. I don't know what other board members think.
Madam President, yeah, I think that's fine, but we need to be aware if we get caught up on something that there's still a long way to go,
Right.
so you may have to cut us off.
Right. Or
Jerry.
if staff knows that this question will be addressed, feel free to just say that, because that can help us keep moving along. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'll lean closer. Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. As we walk through the budget presentation, the first portion of the meeting through slide 20 is specific to teaching and learning, and starting at slide 21, we'll get into more addressing the operating budget. The FY24 budget development strategy was built around enhancing teaching and learning. Funding comes from operational, special revenues, and capital outlay, ETN. Non-recurring federal and special revenues supplement the budget. Maintaining solvency and establishing a method of sustainability and viability by taking into consideration the complex nature of school funding. Considering the following areas, meeting the state requirement for solvency and delivering service, and board priorities. Viewing adjustments and additions for long-term impact to future budget years, and reviewing ESSER expenditures given the expiration is coming up in fiscal year 24. Finding alternative funding sources and restoring cash balance in accordance with board policy.
Could I ask a quick question? Robert, what are special revenues?
Special revenues?
Like just some examples of what special revenues might be.
Federal grants, city grants, county grants, student nutrition, transportation.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we'll provide definitions on the upcoming slide.
Sorry, maybe we should wait.
Okay.
And if I may, ESSER expires in FY '24 or at the,
After.
okay,
the
so
end
this year we're okay.
Yep.
We have ESSER.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is our
Okay,
last year with
it's
ESSER.
our last year with
Correct.
ESSER. Thank you.
The official expiration date is September of 2024. We did have a great start to our visit from the U.S. Education Department, advocating for us and other districts to receive additional funding to replace the ESSER dollars when it expires.
Okay, but just strictly speaking, ESSER does not expire in FY '24.
This is our last year, correct?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so enhancing teaching and learning through strategy. Santa Fe Public Schools' 3-year plan to enhance teaching and learning includes staffing for high-quality instruction, phasing in innovative standards-based learning and grading in schools, funding school sites, ensuring social-emotional learning and support is available, furthering technology, focusing on reducing student absenteeism and improving engagement, and partnering for high-quality after-school and summer programs. Enhancing teaching and learning through staffing. Staffing has been the greatest impact on the operational budget. In fact, 85% of SEG funding is budgeted towards salaries, additional compensation, and benefits. The mandated raise for FY '24 is for everyone, excluding the superintendent. Right sizing for FY '24 conforms to student enrollment and also the CBA. No staff have lost a position for school year 23-24. Any vacant positions have been filled with displaced employees and new hires, and displaced employees are determined by each school student's enrollment and the CBA, which outlines student-to-teacher ratios. Santa Fe Public Schools has strengthened the HR department by supporting them with $893,249 of ESSER funding over 3 years for job fairs, advertising, visa processing, recruitment of staff, alternative licensure, NBCT support as well. Improved communication and HR restructuring occurred in FY '22. Early child care starting in FY '23 was key to staff recruitment and retention throughout the district. Enhancing teaching and learning through instruction. Santa Fe Public Schools uses an equity lens to enhance teaching and learning. Our funding sources include SEG, which is the State Equalization Guarantee. That is our operational funding. ESSER, special revenues, and HB 33, SB 9, and ETN. Support school sites' unique needs through capital outlay funding. Some key budgetary factors are ESSER being utilized over a 3-year period, standards-based teaching and learning, culturally relevant professional development and fine arts, college and career technical education. There are no fine arts cuts for FY '24, and also a new social studies adoption. Enhancing teaching and learning through site funding. Principals were directed to work directly with their SACs this budget season. The budget templates were developed 2 months earlier this year than last. Each school district's educational plan must include a narrative explaining the identified services to improve the academic success of at-risk students. And Santa Fe Public School will add a position to address at-risk students at the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. At-risk funding is based on the following criteria: 3-year average of a school district's percentage of membership, which will determine its Title I allocation; 3-year average percent of membership classified as English language learners, using criteria established by the Office for Civil Rights for the U.S. Department of Ed, and a 3-year average of the percentage of student mobility. Continuing on through enhancing teaching and learning through site funding, per New Mexico statute, allowable uses of at-risk funding through operational are the following. Case management, as you can see, there's several of them, and just to outline a few, reading interventionists, delivered by social workers, counselors, teachers, culturally relevant PD, curriculum development, bilingual multicultural education, whole school interventions that include school-based health centers and community schools, educational programming services that engage and support parents and families in the education of students. Sorry, kind of went too fast. But those are some of them, just to name a few. Continuing on through site funding, 21 schools within the district receive Title I funding, which are special revenue. Under special revenue, Title I funding for the current fiscal year, FY '23, was $2.9 million and supported 27 FTEs. Of those FTEs, the familiar ones are reading specialists, instructional coaches, and teachers and EAs. For FY24, Santa Fe Public Schools will continue to utilize Title I in the same capacity.
Madam President, just briefly, is Title I generally recurring, or is it non-recurring?
It's recurring.
Thank you.
Enhancing teaching and learning through site funding continued. Additional on Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and was amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. It provides financial assistance to local educational agencies and schools with higher numbers or higher percentages of children from low-income families. The PED Student School and Family Support Bureau Guide states that Title I funds are intended to support strategies and activities that are designed to raise the achievement of low-achieving students. Funds may not be used for non-educational activities, such as building and maintenance or repairs, and general district school administrative functions. Continuing through site funding from Enhancing Teaching and Learning, Santa Fe Public Schools is receiving $2.295 million in FY24 state bilingual multicultural education funds through operational, and the list of schools are below for your review.
And Madam President, same question, recurring or non-recurring?
It's through operational, so it's a weight in the actual SEG, so it is recurring.
Thank
as
you.
long as the weight is never phased out. Continuing on through site funding, in FY24, Santa Fe Public Schools will receive Family Income Index funding, which is a separate allocation for the following schools. Cesar Chavez, $192,000, Ortiz, $244,000, and Salazar, $116,000. Senate Bill 3 of 2023,
If I can just jump in, any update on El Camino?
Yes, Board Member Noble, we met with the Public Education Department on Wednesday. They are not eligible to receive additional fundings to replace the $400,000 that they received over each of the last 2 years. So we've worked with Ms. Cooper and also Deputy Superintendent Romero to see if we can lessen the impact to El Camino. And so I think we found some creative solutions to help them. But we did advocate that we start to become notified early in November, December of any of these schools will no longer receive the Family Income Index funding. It really puts us in a difficult position to be notified so late as we're starting to build the budget. And one of our major schools that was receiving over $400,000 is not on the list. They walked us through the formula. They are not qualified to receive funding this year. But again, it's a very complicated formula, tax returns, census, STARS reporting, free and reduced lunch. So it fluctuates each and every year. These are the three that rose to the top for us, and so they'll be receiving the funding for next school year. Again, these are one-year terms. We were fortunate enough that El Camino qualified for 2 years, but each and every year this could change.
Got it, thank you.
Senate Bill 3 of 2023, Family Income Index distributions flexibility provides that schools shall use its Family Income Index allocation on any of the following: evidence-based structured literacy interventions, evidence-based mathematics instruction and interventions to include, including improving career and college readiness of at-risk students, dual or concurrent enrollment in career and technical education and case management. Site funding continued. Just to name a few: tutoring and after-school programs, culturally relevant professional and curriculum development, bilingual and multicultural education, whole school interventions, SEL programs, evidence-based high-quality instructional resources, and services to engage and support parents and families and tribal communities. And the most important one that is new is a school district shall use distributions to expand or improve services, but not to replace existing services. Continuing on through site funding, FY24 local mill levy, SB 9 and HB 33 combined new revenue of $21.5 million. Of mill levy, the most common needs that we see are the annual maintenance needs, such as annual contract and equipment needs for music, art, athletics, facilities and grounds, technology, and also safety and security. our annual facility master plan priorities for summer work facility renewal, our annual custodial contract, our emergency response, such as frozen water pipe, water breaks, on-call construction, annual response to pandemic, such as maintaining and updating air filtration systems, HVAC systems, and also in FY24, Santa Fe Public Schools will continue prioritizing needs-based site requests with this type of funding. Continuing on through site funding, you'll see the locked budget template items and the unlocked, which are required for SAC input. The locked budget items are, they're the positions that support students throughout the schools. So like I mentioned earlier, the CBA has teacher-to-student ratios. So we are mandated by the CBA to ensure that we're providing at least that many teachers per the student. So those are locked areas that are must-haves within the budget. The unlocked site allocations are more of where the flexibility is, such as ESSER funding, supply and material budgets. But the positions, they are locked items. And the I'll go through the unlocked site allocations, the ESSER funds, the Family Income Index funds, Title I, supply, services, software, and materials. That also includes student travel and professional development. Enhancing teaching and learning through SEL, social emotional. Santa Fe Public Schools support students' social emotional needs through second step curriculum for SEL and bullying prevention. That's grant funding from New Mexico Public Education Department and Santa Fe County. 2 school-based health centers funded by Medicaid, 4 SEL days at each school in FY24. School-based mental health services provided by Presbyterian Medical Services and Southwest Family Guidance Center and Cerna Solutions. Wellness teams at each school and community partners. Restorative justice, gender support, safe zones, and WAVE. Funding comes from a multitude of sources, from operational to ESSER to Medicaid and state and local grants. Santa Fe Public Schools continues 5-year phase through FY25 for nurses and nurse aides. The projected was 39.2, and we're currently at 41.24, and our counselors were projected at 48.7, and we're currently at 39.6.
Pausing there, that is from the previous board priorities to get a proper nurse in every school?
Board Member Noble, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Continuing on through SEL, Native American Student Services in the second year of a 5-year, $500,000 grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the NMPED for Project Aware Mental Health Services. Serving Native American students at Santa Fe High School and Capitol High School. Contract with Serenity Wellness to provide 2 full-time therapists and 1 project manager. Santa Fe Public Schools are including 2 full-time peer navigators as well. Goals include increasing awareness of mental health, substance abuse, and co-occurring issues among school-aged youth, promoting resilience, building, and mental health well-being for all school-aged youth, developing a referral pathway system. And as we move on to enhancing teaching and learning through technology, I will go ahead and hand it over to Neil Weaver to go ahead and address these next few slides.
Sorry about that. Board President, members of the board, Superintendent, just quickly wanted to talk about the education technology note. We have 1 more year left that is already approved, and that will be for for school year 23-24. We do have some staffing changes that cost about $325,000 per year. Those are to add positions to support schools, to support the programs, to support our learning management system, different things like that. In addition, our Chromebooks have become increasingly more expensive. This is partly due to COVID. It's also partly due to the student student connectivity study that we did during COVID. Because of that study, we made recommendations to the FCC about standards that we use with our Chromebooks, so upgraded processing, upgraded antennas, and better graphics, sorry. So those devices themselves went from $250 to $380. We're replacing them about every 3.5 to 4 years, so that has quite a large impact on our budget. In addition, we continue to expand and stay on top of network and data security to keep our network safe, to keep our student data safe. We've had supply chain issues that have impacted pretty much everything in our realm, including the upgrade of the audio-video in this room as well, which is slated now for June. Digital resources, we're seeing more and more demand for digital resources out of educational technology note. So we're having to look at how can we adjust our budget to accommodate that. And our district internet as well. We moved all of our sites onto our district WAN. That was an E-rate funded project about 4 years ago. What that did was it increased our network speed and network capacity by about 40-fold and decreased the cost for our internet from the most expensive school district in the state at over $1 million to just over $100,000 a year. Excuse me. The two projects, or sorry, the project that was not included with that was our NI, because NI was not an E-ratable project, but we are working on getting NI connected to the WAN as well as we speak.
Dr. Weaver, could I
Yes.
just ask a definition question? What are digital resources? Like, what are some examples of what those might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I say digital resources, I'm talking about anything, it could be curriculum that is digitally based. It could be an assessment that is digitally based. It covers, it's apps, software packages. It covers a wide gamut of resources. The only other thing that I'll say is that we basically stand to support teaching and learning and look to how can we do this in a way that we're supporting the vision of Santa Fe Public Schools. We're continuing to grow our learning management system. The state of New Mexico, PED, has adopted Canvas as their learning management system, and they don't show any signs of slowing down with the growth. They're pouring a ton of money into the development of their LMS, which is Canvas, and ours is Canvas as well. So we do the same. We're looking at innovation spaces, so transforming our standard classroom labs that students participate with from computers in a row to more innovative spaces that include things like coding, robotics, different computers instead of just one type of computer. So we'll have laptops, we'll have desktops, iPads, et cetera. Also looking at the continued growth of our computer science program. We are currently in year 4, meaning that all of our schools have integrated a computer science model that speaks to their own students' needs. In addition, we have opportunity for professional learning and community partnerships that support engaging learning. Our Learning Designer program, which our LMS manager puts on, is a program that he brings in teachers who are interested in taking that deeper dive on using these digital resources and instructional technology tools for the classroom. And basically, we're just looking to ensure that our equipment and our systems remain ahead of the current needs. So we don't want to play catch-up with our network or with the devices that our students are using. So we're always looking at how we can ensure that we are meeting student needs.
Dr. Weaver, could I make one comment, or are you still going?
I
Sorry.
am finished.
Okay. I just wanted to say that at my daughter's school, they have a computer science class as one of their specials, and it is outstanding to see how the kids are learning through technology, like just really being used not as like any kind of babysitter or overused screen time or anything like that. Like they're really learning just this magical stuff, and they love it. So thank you for supporting
Absolutely.
all
That's
that.
great to hear.
And Dr. Weaver, I just want to add, all the great work that was done during the pandemic, by everyone involved, everybody in this room, especially in the departments of teaching and learning and technology, we were able to transition seamlessly when we had to close Ortiz because of the water line break back to remote learning. So we use those tools. We continue to grow those tools because you never know when a situation like that comes up where we have to revert back to remote learning.
I just want to echo what Vice President Anderson said. My son came home the other day and wanted to show me a little video game that he had coded, and then he started coding again and sat there for 45 minutes and trying to build another video game. And this is really a bright spot. And to also emphasize what the superintendent said, just really appreciating the work that has been done with teaching and learning and technology. And of course, the support of the community for us to have the ETN, but it's just wonderful that we are able to remain ahead of current needs and that there is this engagement and relevancy around some of this technology learning that's happening. So appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Continuing on through enhancing teaching and learning through attendance, Santa Fe Public Schools has a 6-member attendance team to further attendance initiatives. Funded in part with ESSER, communicates to parents and students about the importance of daily attendance and launches attendance monitoring when students' absences exceed 3 days. Concerned with Attendance for Success Act, lack of funding under the act for critical positions like attendance coaches.
Board President and Superintendent, members of the board. Sorry, I forgot my question and then I remembered it. How many FTEs do we have for attendance coaches? Like, how much are we going to lose right now with the lack of funding for attendance coaches?
Yeah, and I'll ask Crystal Ibarra, that's her department, but right now we're continuing forward with the attendance efforts and the attendance coaches. That was a board priority last year. We've made a 7% positive impact on chronic absenteeism. Now, we thought we were on the right path with one of the bills, one of the Senate bills to amend the Attendance for Success Act. We're trying to ask the state for funding to attach to that bill so we can continue with these efforts. So when ESSER expires, that bill would replace the funding that we currently have allocated for it, and so we can continue with these efforts. Did I answer your question? Okay.
If I'm understanding you, we have ESSER for this year, so it will be, we still have one legislative session to possibly fund this. Okay, great.
And Vice President Anderson, if I may, currently we have 5 FTE for attendance coaches.
Thank you so much.
Enhancing teaching and learning through after-school and summer programming. In 2022, Santa Fe Public Schools developed a new community partnership and after-school programming. Santa Fe Public Schools and community partners provided 2,656 students with free programming from June to early August. That equates to 21% of the district's population. 33 programs were offered at 13 different sites within the district. In 2023, Santa Fe Public Schools will again offer free summer programming in June and July. 34 programs will be offered at 13 sites. Breakfast and lunch served at most sites, and supporting the programs are ESSER and funding from the city of Santa Fe.
I just want to add, there's $20 million allocation by the state of New Mexico to access funds for after-school and summer programming. So we're working through that with a small team to see if that's a possible option for Santa Fe Public Schools to jump into so we can continue with this type of program for years to come.
So moving to the review of the proposed FY24 operating budget, some terms and definitions as we move along. The operating budget is the entire budget, including all funds the district is authorized to utilize in the operations of the district. The operating budget includes the following: the operational, which is our main non-categorical fund, funded entirely from the SEG, which is the State Equalization Guarantee. It includes instructional materials and other local revenues such as leases, rentals, E-rate, and cash balance. Special revenue, those are our transportation, student nutrition, federal, state, and local grant funds. Capital outlay, our general obligation or our GO bond, mill levy, special legislative appropriations, and our educational technology note. And also our debt service, those are the categorical funds that we use to pay principal and interest of our GO and ETN bonds. As mentioned previously, the budget is due to the PED on May 30th, 2023. Taking a look at the FY24 projected budget impacts, starting with enrollment and projections. The enrollment for FY23, Santa Fe Public Schools grew by 57 students between the 80th and the 120th day. Current enrollment is 11,067 students. FY23 is based on enrollment of 11,190. Our funding, our current funding for FY23 is based on the average of the 80th and the 120th day from fiscal year 22. So our FY24 funding will be based on the 80th and the 120th day average of FY23. Santa Fe County is projected to gain about 8,000 in population by 2040. The birth rates are below state and national averages, just 7.9 in 2018 compared to New Mexico and U.S. averages around 11 births per 1,000. The birth rate is the most significant driver of the public school enrollment. Enrollment in younger grades, specifically kindergarten and first grades, plummeted in 2020, 2021, and enrollment through higher grades was mixed but somewhat lower overall.
Do we know what the enrollment number is? What's the average between 80 and 120 for FY23? I'm guessing it's lower than, well, it's got to be lower than 1160. I could probably do the math if it's 1167 minus 57 averaged, right? That's what I'm hearing.
No, I think our projections, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Martinez, will be based off of 11,067. It's on the previous slide.
Correct.
First bullet.
Well, they grew between, but it's an average. So we're still, Board Member Noble, we're still waiting for the PED to release the 910B5, which is includes the averages. The average that I did was based on 10,946.5.
Thank you.
And the average that I got was off the certified 80th and 120th day. Continuing on through the enrollment and projection, Santa Fe Public Schools plans to attract and retain students by revamping our attendance plan, summer and after-school programming, CCTE internship program, retaining neighborhood schools, and offering alternatives such as Desert Sage Academy. We have 375 enrolled, which is huge for the Santa Fe Public School District. Those are membership and enrollment that we were able to retain and have membership for as a driver as well for our funding. So it's great that we were able to keep those students. Facility improvements, near-peer tutoring, capstone projects, and social media and community outreach. Looking at the operational budget, the unit value of $6,241.67 was released on April 7th, 2023. That is the initial unit value. It's a $719.17 increase, which is approximately 13.02% over the final unit value for FY23. All staff will receive a 6% salary increase, excluding the superintendent, as I mentioned prior, a 5% salary increase, an additional 1% for benefits increase, and additional learning time. The responsibility factors for principals and assistant principals were also raised by 0.05 based on school type and position for 5%, whichever is higher. There is no additional funding to provide increases for teachers who are advancing levels or to address salary compaction. The at-risk index multiplier increased from 0.30 to 0.33. The fine arts factor also increased from 0.05 to 0.055. And the minimum salary for licensed educational assistants of $25,000. Also hourly employees minimum salary of $15 per hour, which the Santa Fe Public School District already does.
And Robert, I just want to add, or Mr. Martinez, these two slides, slides 24 and 25, are stuff we do know from the state. So again, we're still waiting on a lot of information to be rolled out and given out to districts across the state. But these two slides are definites from the state in this past legislative session.
Could I ask one? Oh, go ahead.
No, you.
Noble. On the fourth bullet on this, no additional funding to provide increases for teachers who are advancing levels. Do I remember correctly from the last presentation that the TCI is based on historical numbers rather than what's happening now? So what might be happening is that we have teachers increasing levels and we're not funded for increasing their pay, or am I wrong? I don't remember from the last time.
Vice President Anderson, it is specifically on the staff that we have at the moment. I believe it happens in October, the TCI, the reporting period.
That's
And
helpful.
as the district did this last year, we requested an audit because we knew the information was not accurate. So we could always do that again if we saw different results in October.
Okay.
So just like student membership is based off current for future, same thing with this.
Okay, great. So that means like when we have teachers at higher levels, that we will be funded for them at the levels that they are?
That they're currently at.
That they're,
So if they're making a transition from this year to next, it's not counted towards the TCI unless it's reported accurately. So as Mr. Martinez said, in October, we'll submit the TCI, and then that takes into effect any increase to the SEG, but also for the upcoming school year.
okay, thank you.
And on this point, if I'm not wrong, Vice President Anderson has just put her finger on one of the reasons it sometimes doesn't add up, because we're funded at last year's level, but we pay teachers at this year's level, or we will pay teachers in FY '23-24. If somebody moves from Tier 1 to Tier 2, or Tier 3, they will get that salary, but the district is funded at the previous year's level. So this is one of those issues why the legislature is like, we increased money, why doesn't it add up? And it sort of is how the units fall out and how that works with staffing and students.
Yeah, if I can add, you're spot on, Board Member Noble. What we saw when we saw the tiers increase by $10,000, if you remember, a few years back, we saw individuals that were moving from level 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 receiving upwards of a 30% salary increase. So even though we're saying a minimum of, for example, in this slide, 6%, but in years past, they moved the minimums up 10,000, and they said you are guaranteed a X amount increase, but because they moved tiers, it could double or triple what we actually have to pay because they did move levels, and we want teachers to move levels, but it is on prior year.
I think I was misunderstanding before. Okay, so it is on prior year, so we are getting shorted, essentially.
Unless we lose qualified teachers, in which case.
Let's not do that.
Yeah, let's not do that. But ultimately, it is that TCI thing that I finally understood, and I appreciate that it's equilibrated across the SEG and across the district. But of course, salaries for teachers and staff are paid to individuals, so that's. On this, if I may, this 6% salary increase, which is not an average, as we determined last week, is that meant to cover any additional instructional time, and what needs to be bargained around any additional instructional time? Where are we with all that?
Yeah, great question. It is. And what the state did this year, they moved the funding from K-12 plus, the old K-12 plus, because it's currently still called K-12 plus. The additional instructional time that we're now required to provide to our students and also required of our staff is to be covered by this 6%. It's really 5% raise for the additional time. The 1% as we mentioned in bullet 2, is to cover the increased cost to the employees' benefits. So when we're talking about 6%, it's 6% across the board. It's not an average. The governor did veto out the average language out of House Bill 2. So the 5% is just a shift of funding by the state from the old K-12 plus program to the new required minimums that the state is asking of all districts to implement. So it is intended to cover the increased time in the classroom.
And just to follow up, we are above the, I mean, we're already pretty much at the, where the minimum is now, and I believe we're above that. Do I remember correctly that there is potential for additional money, and this is sort of integrating the K-5 plus and additional instructional hours, and where are we on that?
And we did meet with PED on Monday, and that's why we have our specialist here over federal programs, Ms. Ryan Cooper. We met with PED to really try to figure out how to access this additional funding or these weighted units. It's really tied to after-school programming and our enrichment programming, after-school programming and summer programming. So we can earn additional revenue, additional weight by including all this stuff that we've been implementing over the last year and a half to try to generate more revenue. And so that is something we're working through. We met with, I think there was 3 or 4 of us, and there was 9 or 10 of them. So we're trying to work through the process together. I think we may have been the first district to ask them about this program and this funding source. So again, it's an ongoing process. It's something that we're working collaboratively with PED to try to increase the revenue to the district. And I didn't answer your second question. Negotiations opened up this week between Ms. Romero and Ms. Wagner. They're both the leads of the 2 different bargaining units. So what we're proposing, again, is the 6%. We'll look at it with the union, look at the salary tables, because all salary tables have to be regenerated. So it's not just as simple as saying you're going to get 6%. We have over 60 salary tables that we have to go through and present to the union through negotiations. So again, it's not just saying this is 6%, take it or leave it. This is an ongoing discussion with the union that opened up this week.
And, well, I'll just make a comment. I understand that there's no additional funding to address salary compaction. As ever, I hope through our CBA process that we can do that. It's not fair to not work on salary compaction in our pay tables.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think we did a great job of starting to address that last budget season, and through negotiations, and both lead negotiators are shaking their head. We tried to prevent compaction, so we did take that into account last year, and I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue this year.
Superintendent, can you, I think there was one other question that didn't get answered, and that was about the additional learning time in our school days, because we were close on
Thank you.
high schools,
Yep.
but not close enough in elementary and.
Yeah, and we'll present the school calendar, the official school calendar for acceptance by the board at our next meeting. So for our secondary schools, which include middle, we were already at the minimum or slightly above. We did find one new correction in the bill, that they moved parent-teacher conferences from instructional time over to PD. So all years prior, I think this probably goes for pre-K too, doesn't it, Board Member Noble?
I have no idea. It's a good question.
I think it does. We found that out by exploring, because we're going to have to expand hours for pre-K. So they moved PD, parent-teacher conferences, from instructional time that you could count towards the state minimums to PD. So we had to make one slight adjustment to the calendar. We'll send it to you. The union's already agreed to the calendar. Just one minor adjustment. We did have to add 54 hours. Is it 52 hours to elementary time? Yep.
President Bose, Superintendent Chavez, it was just adding an additional 5 minutes to the end of the school day to make it happen. So they're really small adjustments.
Yep. And during today's visit with the U.S. Deputy Secretary and our own Secretary of Ed, we talked about that, and they were very, they took what we talked about, to heart, and we also talked about the 4 additional SEL days that we've added to the calendar. And so again, they thought that was a great innovative way to increase instructional time, meet the students where they are, but providing them the opportunities to feel safe and make sure that both staff and students are doing well, both emotionally and mentally. So again, being creative with that calendar, I think we did a great job with it. Again, we have a calendar committee that is comprised of district staff, site staff, union representation, and parents. And so that was all part of developing this calendar.
Okay. Moving on, the operational budget continued. 1% increase in the ERB employer contribution in FY24 brings it to 18.15%. Employer benefits also increased 7.24%. Increased the minimum employer contributions for employee group health benefits. At least 80% of the cost of the insurance of an employee whose annual salary is less than $50,000. At least 70% of the cost for an employee whose annual salary is $50,000 or more but less than $60,000, and at least 60% of the cost of the insurance for an employee whose annual salary is $60,000 or more. Some notable impacts of the operational budget: the adjustments to address decline in student enrollment and decrease in generated units, meeting mandated percentage and minimum increase for all employee work groups, improving estimated cash balance to 5% in alignment with board policy, continuing use of ESSER funding for innovative programming. The budget will need to be modified through BARS, budget adjustment requests, after allocations are received and modifications are required.
So as we go through this budget process with you guys and we start to receive those award letters, you'll see those on upcoming board meetings as part of the consent agenda. So again, those bars are very important as we receive those award letters from the state.
I'm a little confused by the phrasing of an improve our estimated cash balance. We have a board policy to have a cash balance of 5%. What does it mean to have an estimated cash balance? Just that we're always estimating it?
Well, Board Member Noble, the cash balance is always adjusting because until, like for the last board meeting, the board approved the cash rollover from the previous audited year. So that helps go back into cash. So, and also, as in one of the next slide, one of my notes is it really depends on what encumbrances do not turn into expenditures, which can be dissolved back into the budget, which would then be cash, the rollover. So any of that takes place in the FY23 audit would also increase the cash on top of the 5% that was built into the budget.
Do we have a sense of where we are now?
Yes, we do, Board Member Noble. We are currently at about $2 million before any carryover that takes place. So hoping to end the year, dependent on the expenditures, as I mentioned, not being in any disencumbrances. We've seen that increase over years from anywhere from $2 to $4 million. So expecting at least $2 million to be unencumbered and roll back into cash on top of the $2 million that we currently have.
And is it 5% of the operational budget or the operating? It's the operational, isn't it?
Operational.
Which is about 200 million for the sake of round numbers.
It's 118 million this year.
Our operational budget?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So the FY23 operational snapshot right here, the salaries and benefits are currently at 109.4, almost 5 million. The site district expenditures are currently at 17.4 million. So our total that has been spent this year or is being spent is 126.9 million. So the new revenue through the SCG last year was 118 million. As mentioned, this number could change depending on encumbrances that are not fully spent. And it also could change up at the top columns from salaries and benefits to site district expenditures, dependent on needs of service and availability of service. If we're unable to staff a full-time FTE, but can do it through a contractor, like with a diagnostician, because special ed is also included in here, those costs will shift.
And Robert, before we move on, I'm sorry, Mr. Martinez, Do you want to just briefly explain that all vacancies or all positions are budgeted? So as we start to finish the fiscal year, how that works out with vacancies?
Absolutely, Superintendent Chavez. So as Superintendent Chavez mentioned, all our positions are budgeted. So what happens is a position, FTE, is encumbered just as you would a supply material. And once those have been closed out, once the fiscal year closeout has happened, some of those will dissolve back in, and those encumbrances would close, so they would increase cash. And they would increase audited cash, which would roll forward from FY23 into FY24 around the same time that we're doing these cash bars that just took place last week. The FY24 projected operational expenditures, the school site expenditures currently at $655,227. All other district-wide expenditures, $15.6 million, for a total of almost $3 million. The school site expenditures include instructional materials, supplies, materials, PD, art, music, PE, and student travel. The district-wide expenditures also include the special ed department and our ability to and requirement to meet MOE, maintenance of effort. The FY24 projected operational salaries with benefit options. Currently, the district is on a 74-26 split. If the district continues that, it would be $114.482 million. And if we broke out by the tiers from the legislative mandates of at least funding it to that amount, it would be $102.4 million. The difference is $4 million.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I asked this in our meeting on Monday and already got an answer, but I just want to ask it in front of my other board members so that we're all on the same page. So if we go to what the legislature requires, that could mean that, or could it mean that some of our higher tiered teachers see a decrease in their take-home pay?
Vice President,
Yeah, we're going to bring up one of our staff members, Mr. Exner, who had been with HR, has been running a lot of these numbers and a lot of these scenarios. So when we've talked about what it could look like, we've even looked at the 1% and what that does to an increase to the employee benefits. We do know that 1% is going to cover the increased cost to the employee benefits plus some. So we've been doing a lot of homework, if you want to call it that, to look at these numbers. Mr. Exner, did you want to answer?
Sure.
Vice President?
Yes, thank you. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, all employees are assured of getting at least a 6% raise. That 6% is on top of their salary. So if we use a level 1 teacher as an example, approximately $50,000 salary, the increase would be about $3,000. The 7.24% increase in insurance premiums is an increase based on the premium itself. So we offer 21 different medical insurance programs for our employees, 7 different programs, and they could choose employee only, employee plus 1 dependent, or family coverage. So a total of 21 options. The most expensive of those 21 is about $2,000 per year in the total premium. Split that between the 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, or the 74-26, and then the employee pays 7.24% of that number, so far less than a $3,000 increase that they'd be receiving.
Okay, so even if we move from 74-26 to 60-40, a level 3 teacher who's making more, who's into the 60-40, with the most expensive plan, will not be taking home less money than they currently are today.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
And that's the most expensive plan. The least expensive plan for an individual coverage is only $482 for the year. Apply that split to it, the 7% increase, and it's a very small amount.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
He's turned into our math guy.
I
And
love
if
it. I
I-
majored in English, so.
And if I remember correctly, we have by far the largest percentage of employees, like 687 in the 60-40 category.
You are correct, which also includes district staff.
Thank you.
Moving on to the FY24 budget impacts, these are non-negotiables. These are must-haves in the budget. The CBA stipends, $4 million. Substitutes, $1.5 million. The NIMSIA risk premium at $4.175 million. We saw a slight increase in that of $21,000, which is factored in there. The utilities increase of $1 million, more than what is currently already budgeted, so $3.5 million total. Cash at $6.5 million, that's the 5%, and overtime of $100,000 brings the total to $17.275 million.
And sorry, the cash 5% is the board policy on the operational budget.
That's correct, Board Member Noble.
Okay, which is still moving depending on encumbrances from this year.
Correct. And that 5% is done on the estimation of the SEG for FY24. We've still yet to receive our 910B5 from the PED, but our estimation was done off of the certified data from the Santa Fe Public School District, so I would imagine it to be very close. The projected FY24 operational budget totals, as you'll see two tables. One is, the top one is with the 74-26, and the bottom one is the 80-20, 70-30, 60-40. The non-negotiables at the 17.275, the salaries and benefits from the slide before, and the total expenditures that we reviewed from the site and the departments. The total for the top is $148 million, and the bottom is $144 million. And as I mentioned, it's about a $4 million difference. I also want to note that we moved $1.459 million from operational to Medicaid for RNs and nurse assistants. That was 12.8 for RNs and 11.7 nurses. So we have done some cost shifting. Our projected FY24 revenue. The funding sources you'll see on the left-hand side, operational. The FY23 revenue we're expecting to receive through operational is the FY23 is currently where we're at, $128,620,114, and that includes the rollover cash that you all just approved at the last budget or board meeting. Our projected revenue through operational for FY24 is almost $8 million.
And I just want to make sure that we see that first word on the top of the slide projected until we receive everything we need from the Public Education Department.
Correct. Thank you, Superintendent Chavez. Moving to special revenue, we have yet to receive any awards or carryover for grants or special revenue for FY24, but I did include the FY23 revenue from the grants and special revenue funds, so you were able to see a picture of how large that portion is. It was $61.8 million for FY23. And as mentioned previously, any awards that come in or allocations or carryover that are received to the district will be done in the form of a budget adjustment request and go to the board for approval. Capital outlay, FY23 revenue was $108.358 million. Currently, the projected revenue for FY24 is $94.8 million. The reason you'll see a decrease in revenue is because our most recent bond sale is for GO bond is less than what we've done in the prior year. So it's just less revenue coming in from that bond sale. The debt service, $99.3 million, and projected revenue for debt service is $90 million. Total operating budget for FY23 to date is $178,687, and the projected revenue is $319.7 million. And as I mentioned, all those special revenue funds are pending, so I would expect for those to at least be similar to FY23. And the FY23 revenue I also want to include is from our initial unit value and then the final unit value as well that was given to the district in February.
Yeah, and I also want to add that operational still for FY24 is also a projected. It's not a static number. We have to work through that 910B5 still.
Right, correct.
So I was going to ask about that. What, and forgive me if I missed it, what's in the FY24 projected budget? Is it just the SEG, or are there other factors in there?
So for operational, Board Member Noble, it is just the SEG is the only driver for operational funding.
Okay, in that 134.7.
Yes.
Okay. So the other factors, like the fine arts factor that went up and all of that, is not reflected in the FY24 134.7 projected
It
number?
is factored.
It
It's
is-
a part of the 910B5, and this is an estimation, as Superintendent Chavez mentioned. We have yet to receive. I did do a projected 910B5 tool that was provided from the School Budget Bureau from the NMPED, and I also verified with our budget analyst what the indexes were and the drivers were to ensure that we're working off the same thing, but the PED's 910B5 verification is the final say-so, so this is just a projection at the moment. This does not include any cash rollover or anything in the 134.7 either.
Right, but
This is
it
just
does
revenue.
include the factors that are on the worksheet?
Yes.
Okay. And it does include the increased factors that will be on this year's worksheet?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President, there's a big difference in capital outlay, so what impact does that have?
Secretary Abeyta, that was the difference in the revenue is the difference in the bond sale. So last year, Deputy Superintendent Yonda Wagner was at 30 million. So this year we're only selling 20 million. And also the cash balance was rollover from FY22 into FY23 was larger than what I expect it to be for FY23 to FY24.
And just to add to these answers, the CRC, led by Deputy Superintendent Wagner, has planned for these bond sales, of 30 or 20, so they've prioritized, so it's not going to delay any type of improvements or any type of project. So it was part of the planning for this $100 million GEO bond.
Okay.
And just to piggyback off of that, you're not supposed to sell when you don't have a planned project, like that's shovel-ready. So even if we wanted to sell for 30 million, if we didn't have projects planned for that, that would not be advisable.
But the change doesn't impact the items on slide 13 where we talk about capital outlay, like summer work, custodial contracts, things like that, equipment for music, art, so those won't be impacted. Thank you.
Okay. And just to the right, you'll see just a pie chart of the different funds, funding sources that we have in the district and just how instrumental they are to the whole success of the district. They really come into play entirely. Moving to grants and special revenue. Grant special revenue provided additional revenue and moving forward initiatives that are not funded through the SEG. We heavily rely on those key grants. Some of the key grants are special revenue grants are our CLSD, our Comprehensive Literacy State Development. That's an $862,780 grant. It funds salaries, benefits, additional compensation for teachers and coordinators, professional development, and also provides for supplies. Our IDEA B grant, which is really specific to special ed, $3.6 million, also funds salaries, benefits, additional compensation for teachers, coordinators, PD, and also provides for contracts for speech, occupational therapists, and supplies such as books and hearing and mobility aids. And also our Title I grant, I know we talked about it earlier, but was $2.9 million, funded salaries, benefits, additional compensation for teachers and coordinators, PD, contract services, and supplies for instruction, reading materials, and technology. Continuing on with grants and special revenue, Santa Fe Public Schools, as mentioned before, has yet to receive any awards or carryover for grants or special revenue for FY24. New awards or carryover that are not included in the operating budget submission are budgeted in the form of a bar requiring board approval. There are five types of bars. An initial budget, so that would be a new award that would come in. Increased budget would be if there was carryover or if the award increased from the initial allocation. A decreased budget would be also from carryover if there was anything spent during the fiscal year crossing. It would be to decrease the budget to the actual allocation. A transfer bar is a bar that happens between functions, which is if you're moving from like student support services to student instruction services, and a maintenance bar, which is moving between the objects. That's if you're moving between professional development, supplies, materials, that type of thing. Grants and special revenue assist in funding several sites and departments. Our program managers assist in the decision-making process regarding how awards are spent or allocated. Currently, we have 299.38 FTE that are funded from grants and special revenue. As mentioned prior, we don't have any allocations or carryover for FY24, but I wanted to provide this to you so you had a listing of what all our current grants are right now and what the budget for those grants are. I'll let you go through that, and I won't bore you going through 3 pages of grants. But if you have any questions on any of these that do stand out to you now or in the future, please feel free to ask. But just out of our grants and special revenue, our total budget for this year is $44.94 million, $954 million.
Isn't it 61 on the previous chart?
That includes transportation and student nutrition.
Okay.
And other
it.
sources of special revenue funds. This is just specific to any of the grants.
Okay.
Moving forward with special revenue transportation, funded independently through the NMPED using a formula that calculates ridership and mileage, our FY24 allocation has yet to be released. The allocation is projected to cover department expenses, including staff maintenance, fuel, and other operating costs. The allocation is estimated to be at least $4.1 million to address the salary increases of 6% mandated.
Thank you, Board President Jose and Mr. Martinez and Superintendent. We had talked about the big idea, not necessarily possibility and not in this budget, of being able to provide transportation, as long as we continue interzone transfers, to be able to possibly provide transportation to not someone's zone school, but someone's transferred school, so that we kind of increase the equity between people whose parents can take 40 minutes to take them to school and people whose parents can't. Is there ever going to be any money available to do something like that from the state, from the federal government, from anywhere? I don't know where we would get it in our own budget, but do you see a potential for that on the horizon past this year?
Board members, superintendent, I don't know of any such funding source. What we're showing you tonight is what's projected to provide for that to and from. Again, back to that language of our responsibility is to provide students transportation to and from their school day in their boundaried school. I have not heard anything. I didn't see anything legislatively. I don't anticipate that to be the case.
Okay, moving on with special revenue, student nutrition. The student nutrition projection for FY24 revenue is $4.9 million and is based on projected participation rates or meals served, federal reimbursements for meals served, and does not include prior year cash balance. This projection is favorable for maintaining current staffing levels and covering projected food and other operating costs. Moving on to a more descriptive breakdown of the capital outlay funds. As you'll see, we have our GEO bond, special state, those are our legislative appropriations, HB 33, SB 9 local. SB 9 state match, the difference with SB 9 local and SB 9 state match is an allocation. So the state match allocation that we received was actually approved by the board in the form of a bar a few weeks ago. So you'll see how late that allocation came in, and that was intended for FY23. ETN as well on there. The FY23 budget for capital outlay entirely was $122.183 with 80 million expenditures, 80.5 million expenditures. And as you'll see, House Bill 33 funds 10.7 FTE, and ETN currently funds 33 FTE. statute allows for House Bill 33 to fund 6% of salaries based on prior year expenditures that are relative to construction management and within the facilities and maintenance department. So that's why those 10.7 FTEs are in there. Our FY24 budget for capital outlay is currently $94.8 million. And as mentioned previously, you'll see some of the budgets are slightly lower, such as Go Bond. It's just estimated cash rollover as well is lower than the previous year. I also want to mention that for the legislative appropriations, they include $140,000 for the Ortiz water line replacement, $150,000 for ATC charter sports facility construction, and $815,000 for affordable housing construction. $52,969.96 was reverted at the end of this fiscal year and will not roll over to FY24. And that was from a prior appropriation. It was the backup generator from ESC. That project was completed, but the entire allocation was not needed. Moving forward with debt service. Debt service pays off the debt using principal and interest payments. Debt is paid out over more than 1 year. Debt is paid out in August and February. One of those payments is interest only, and the other includes interest and principal and paying agent fees, and those paying agent fees are the other services that you'll see in here. So our county tax collection and bond principal payment, bond principal interest, the other services, which are the agent fees, and the debt services reserve. The debt services reserve is the cash balance for debt. We have to budget cash, so it's budgeted in debt services reserve, but we don't budget it in the bond principal payment or the bond principal interest. As I mentioned, debt is paid out over more than 1 year. It's typical for ETN for it to be paid out in a 3-year cycle, and for Go Bond anywhere between 5 and 8 years.
Why is FY23 expenditure 0 on debt services reserve?
Board Member Noble, that's a great question. So it's cash. So you can't have expenditures from cash. You would have to move the cash into either county tax collection, bond principal payment, bond interest payment, or other services in order for it to become an expenditure.
Okay, that's a technical answer, but the totals then would, I mean, our total for FY23 budget versus expenditure is way low. Do we not have to use any of that money?
Board Member Noble, we don't at this time. If we paid out debt all in 1 or 2 years, we would, but because we pay it out in a further cycle, it resides in cash until it rolls out. So that way also the district never runs out or is unable to make any principal or interest payments that are required in February or August.
So do we expect that there will be additional expenditures that would have come out of the budgeted debt services reserve but would go into a different line item for it to be an expenditure before the end of FY23?
Board Member Noble, no.
But I understand we have to budget it in FY24, but are we going to need that 47 million?
Board Member Noble, it has to remain in debt services. And as I mentioned, you have to budget cash. So we will have to continue budgeting debt services reserve in FY24. You'll see that the debt service reserve was higher for FY24 than it was FY23 because there was additional money that came in for debt services or is estimated to come in, which would increase the cash. I would imagine that our county tax collection, the payment for bonds and the interest payments and other services would not increase, so I left those budgets flat. If we did have to pull anything from debt services reserve, we would have to do a bar to move that money from debt services reserve into one of those top areas. And also, the way that we forecast our principal and interest payments, it's done in the form of the 955F, which is a worksheet that we work with the PED, and it's calculating the debt of the organization broken out by object. So we have a thorough breakdown of all of our interest and principal payments to get to what our budget and expended amounts are and should be.
Okay, we can move on, but just to say, I don't understand this at all.
Okay.
This $47 million that we need to budget, but that we didn't need at all this year.
And Board Member Noble, if I may, if it provides any help, so for instance, the bonds that we sold last year, we won't start paying on those until like a year and a half, but then we receive money. So that money that we're receiving while we're not paying principal and interest goes into debt services reserve.
Could I ask a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
So when will we need it? When will we pay from that fund?
Vice President Anderson, as I mentioned, ETN is usually over a 3-year life cycle, and Go Bond can be anywhere between 5 and 8 years. So it's really, and the debt service reserve cash is actually in a STO account, a state treasury account that accrues some sort of interest. FY24 budget impacts, these are others. Areas of investment and program emphasis remain the same for FY24. Our funding is fluid throughout the year with expenditures reallocated based on need and availability of funding. Activity funds are often used to bolster programs such as music, for example, to supplement additional requests outside of budget authority. The PED is requiring higher budgeting for those functions most likely to improve student outcomes, particularly instruction, student support services, and instruction support services such as instructional materials. If not doing so, the PED will require revisions in the budget submission. Federal funding, ESSER update. ESSER funding will expire in September 2024, as Superintendent Chavez mentioned prior. Funding has provided standards-based teaching and learning, culturally relevant professional development and fine arts, college and career technical education and internship program, a revamped attendance plan, summer and after-school programming. Desert Sage Academy, as mentioned previously, has 375 enrollment. It's capstone projects, social media and community outreach, and provided COVID response physical health.
And I just want to add, we used ESSER to start Desert Sage. It's self-supporting now.
So moving to the budget process and milestones, as mentioned previously, we started the budget workshops around 2 months earlier this year. The site department-based budget workshops were done February 27th through March 13th. In April, as mentioned, we received the unit value and the program funding at our spring budget workshop, which was April 11th through 13th. The Board of Education update on framework and legislation took place at the April 13th meeting. The Board of Education study session to review the operating budget and budget impacts today, April 20th, and future meeting of April 26th to review the initial operating budget. In May, the Board of Education regular meeting is also May 11th as a tentative, and the adoption and submission to the PED on May 30th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martinez. Are there other questions, comments, concerns that weren't previously voiced through the presentation?
Madam President, this is, I guess, according to our agenda, the budget, superintendent budget recommendations. So presumably we wrap this up and discuss board priorities? Yes. Okay. Okay, I have a couple more questions, I guess. All right, we're doing librarians. I appreciate the update on that. I don't remember which slide that was on. And just for context, this was for many years, I'm thinking at least 3, that Lorraine Price, Maureen Cashman in particular, were on the board, and what we had worked on and given direction to the superintendent, who was then Dr. Veronica C. Garcia, was to really get a fully qualified nurse and a fully qualified librarian in each school. So my question is, I appreciate the update on nurses. Do we have any idea where we are on librarians?
Yeah, I think we'll both tag team this one. Like special ed teachers, that is a hard area to fill. We're doing our best. We meet with the librarian leads to really plan and discuss. But again, it's one of those areas that not a lot of people go into anymore. So if Deputy Superintendent Romero want to talk a little.
And I will just echo that. It is very hard to find a certified librarian. Most of our schools have a librarian aide that supports students going and checking out books, but it is not a certified librarian. Our high schools or secondary schools, they do have certified librarians. It's very hard to find certified librarians for elementary. But on another note that I just wanted to share, yesterday, the union president and myself signed an MOU to recruit new nurses and nurse aides, so a sign-on stipend, $5,000 for certified nurses and $3,000 for nurse aides. So that's from a grant.
A DOH
from the
grant.
DOH, so trying to recruit.
Thank you very much. Do we still have the system where the library aides have the ability to go to a certified librarian? We were doing something to make sure that they had the access to, in essence, a mentor librarian if they needed it.
As Superintendent Chavez was saying, we meet with the certified librarians, one that's elementary and one that's secondary, I would say maybe every 2 months, once a month. And part of their work is to work with the aides and other certified librarians, but I will bring this up again. So they do have mentors and people that support them.
Thank you. And what about counselors? That was the other thing. It was nurses, librarians, and counselors.
Yeah, we're shy of it, but we have a couple more years to try to actively recruit. Again, this is a high-need area for us because we do understand, especially, throughout all grade levels, they play a really, really vital role in providing guidance, providing mentorship, just providing a safe place for students to go and even discuss their feelings or their thoughts. So we do see this. We're making headway, but we still have a ways to go. And I don't remember the exact number, but we are shy of the FY25 expiration date.
Was that a goal set? I don't actually. Okay, that sounds right. Thank you. Appreciate that. So on the overall picture, I appreciate what we're getting here in terms of math. I see, and there's a lot in the first half of the presentation that is a summary of some of what we're doing. I think what I see is that we have an estimated operational budget of 144 or 148 million. And we have projected operational revenue of 134.8. Is that right? I'm looking at a minimum of a $10 million delta, or $9 million, really.
Board Member Noble, that is correct. It's 9.2 million that the district is. As Superintendent Chavez mentioned, this is just projections until we receive any carryover or our 910B5 from the PED.
Yes. I know that the worksheet's important, but, okay. That's reasonably serious, maybe not as serious as it could be, but I guess, and that includes the 6.5 that we want to get to in cash reserves.
That's correct, Board Member Noble.
Which would be about 5% of our operational budget, which we are still below, and we have been, I guess, since COVID, really.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess one of the key things is, Superintendent, what are the questions for the board here? As we look at this and, as we think about this frame, and I know I've been a little frustrated that we haven't really dug into priorities or what our delta might be before tonight. And we have 2 more meetings now to go on this, and I know we could always schedule another one, but the operational budget is always where there are questions, and we try to incorporate board priorities. But with, and I don't know if they're ideas, but with a $9 million delta, we've got some work to do.
Yep, yep. I think the first thing for the board to think about is, on a couple of these slides, is looking at that 74-26 split, the 60-70-80, because between the 2 plans, we could say that it's a $4 million difference between the 2, but when you're looking at it, there's creative ways to shorten that spread. But also, I think, so that's the first part that we should start talking about. I think the second part is making sure that we're staffing sites appropriately, not overstaffing, and that's something that we're still working on. We've worked on that with our schools, with our departments, and also for us is making sure departments and sites stay within their budget. That's a very, very important piece to maintaining a balanced budget. So that's some work on our end. I think the first step is to look at the insurance, if we all agree at this point, or something for you guys to consider as we move into a few more meetings, that 6% as well, maintaining a 6% and nothing higher as far as the raises. So again, those are things that are, I think, come to the top of my head as something for us to start to consider. We also are still going through negotiations with both unions, so that's something we'll bring to the table as we meet in the upcoming weeks.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. And the $9.2 million delta is the lowest possible delta with the current math that we have, just to say that is my choice to go a little bit rosy. And gosh, I hope that worksheet makes the numbers look better. I also I think as a final point on this topic, on slide 42, the second bullet, and Superintendent, thank you. Your comments made me remember this, but that funding is fluid throughout the year with expenditures reallocated based on need and availability of funding. And, as you say, with the sites, with the, I just want to point out this has been the crux of what the audit committee has just been discussing. And it's really, really important, and how the superintendent and the board get eyes on this throughout the year, given the complexity of what we're dealing with in school funding, given particularly the special revenue and grant funds and all of these things that go in there. But that's the question right there. So I appreciate that, and I guess I can wrap up my comments, and I'm happy and excited that we finally get to talk about board priorities for the budget, but I do just want to say I think we're late. I don't know, and I guess the superintendent can hear it and can weave them in. This is something we have often done well before the SEG is even released for FY24, so that it can be baked into some of what is happening now. So, I don't know what we'll be able to realistically prioritize as the board. And I do think, I guess we're on a reasonable schedule for some of the budget process and milestones. I will just say that I remain a little bit concerned that we only have these 2 more meetings to really look at a budget and then adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Vice President Anderson.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on what Board Member Noble mentioned about the $9 million. So that 9 million, if I'm understanding, is if we go with the 80, 70, 60 plan. So even if we choose the lowest, we'll still end up with this deficit. And I'm concerned about how we'll address that and where the money will come from.
And that's a great concern. Once we finalize what the SCG is going to generate and also receive those award letters, then we'll have a better understanding, even if we have a deficit. So again, it's really pending at this point. We're trying to provide you guys a framework of what could happen, but again, we're waiting for award letters, the SCG to be determined exactly what we're going to be receiving. So that could shrink. It could shrink immediately. It could be zero, but we don't know at this point. So again, we want to be very transparent of possibilities as we move through the next month.
And I know you don't know specifically, but when do we usually expect award letters to come in?
Vice President Anderson, they are throughout the year, all the time. They could be some in the beginning of the fiscal year for initial award letters. Also, fiscal years run differently for other agencies and entities, so they're just constant throughout the year.
So if we're not getting them until like December, how do we budget in April for those?
We're not allowed to until we receive the award letters. We don't have
Okay.
budget authority through the PED to do so.
Okay, so our operational budget will stay smaller because we don't have those award letters, but will be, no. Okay.
The.
Oh, operation.
Yes,
Yeah, operating
it's that
budget.
zero in
Yeah.
the special revenue
Okay.
on the slide with
Right.
the. And so I don't know if there are award letters on slide 32. It's pending, it's not, well, the math
Right.
is zero, but I don't know if award letters, and maybe that's a question, whether award letters do hit operational. Because it certainly hits our operating budget, and that award letters are, I think, primarily about special revenue, grants and special revenue.
Right. Okay.
Just to follow up there, the estimated FY '24 operational revenue here on slide 32 includes, as we discussed at the beginning, includes the ESSER money.
No.
No?
ESSER money is in special revenue.
Okay.
And, yeah, operational, the SEG does not filter any ESSER money.
Okay, so we've talked about the issue of when the ESSER money goes away, which is really FY '25, one more year, not this budget, but we will see that issue in our special revenue line.
Board Member Noble, that is correct. It will dissolve out.
Okay, so we have a couple issues. The ESSER one is not for this year, not for FY '24, but we do have this operational delta between 9 and 13 million. And again, it's more like 13 if we didn't make the changes on the benefits.
Vice President Anderson, just to answer your question about special revenue a little bit more, because I spent some time looking over last year's budget presentations. The May 26th meeting that we had last year, which again is like a month later than now, I think we had $18 million in special revenue that had been allocated at that time, and we got to 60 million. So even in a month, we're not going to have a whole picture of what that is.
Madam President, when you talk about budget, you talk about revenues, of course, but you also look at expenditures. And one thing that piqued my interest that Member Noble talked about was library and librarians. Libraries were so critical to us when we were kids, and even our kids. But they're not so much anymore with technology and with Google, and with now we're getting into AI, and we're getting, so what's the national trend when it comes to libraries in schools? And because I know libraries in general, there's a lot of discussion about what are you going to do, you know, you don't really need the traditional library anymore. So, I mean, maybe that might be an area, if you're looking ahead, where you cut or you don't have the traditional librarian anymore, and maybe that's a reason why we can't find librarians, because that industry may be, it for sure is changing. But so what's the trends when it comes to things like that?
Secretary Abeta, I absolutely agree. The trends are changing. Kids are reading books digitally.
Right.
They're working in their classrooms with texts online, and we've invested a lot of, we receive bond money, like Go Bond money for library books, and we give each site allocations, and we're investing a lot of those funds in that online books and resources. And you're right, the trend is things are happening online. In our secondary schools, their certified librarian is more of like a social media type support to students that are doing research, but all of it is switching to online.
And it would just be interesting to see what other trends, due to just the way technology has really changed the landscape and changed the school to and for, I don't know, 50, maybe 100 years or longer, school stayed the same. If you went to school kind of, but this explosion in technology is just.
And I think the pandemic made it come
quicker,
even sooner. And teachers now have access to all these leveled libraries online. So their kids have access to the books in the classroom, and they know their reading levels in the classroom, and so they're utilizing technology more.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I'm not the expert that Deputy Superintendent Romero is, but just to give like a personal interaction with librarians, I got to work really closely with the librarian at Gonzalez, who's a certified librarian, and she's amazing. She's now with the state library system. But she did a lot of support for teachers in finding resources, so digital resources and print resources, and a lot of navigation of information for the students, and a lot of using that library space to learn information literacy and digital literacy. And then she also did really cool things like for Dia de los Niños, put QR codes on the walls so that kids could go from book to book, like walking around the school, and like really introducing them to reading and gathering information, but in a really savvy, up-to-date sort of way. So it was really amazing to see her like navigate information in a way that wasn't just, here's a book that's high interest, lower level, or, whatever it was. It was, I could tell that she was changing with the times, and I don't know if that's true of every librarian, but it was cool to see that there was still a relevance for someone trained in that field.
And I will add, I think, also, going digital, a lot of our teachers have learned to become more savvy with navigating all that and providing resources and research support to students.
I also want to say I dug into this issue a bunch after I initially came on the school board, in part because that was after I guess it was the 2016 election, when we saw an explosion of misinformation and a giant lack of media literacy, I would say, and social media, which we're still getting our heads around. And now, of course, artificial intelligence and chatbots are coming to roll over us. And I also had the opportunity to engage with the librarian at Gonzalez. And just to say, I think this really does continue to be an area of need. It's for professionals, and I know that, like many needed professionals, there aren't folks beating down the doors to get degrees in library science. I understand that. But as we move into an age where, as we have, materials are way more easily accessible, but they are often harder to navigate. I think we do need this, and I appreciate what we're doing to fill the gaps and provide the expertise that we need. I do recall that library aides are paid shockingly low wages, very often. And, it sounds like we have 2 certified librarians at our comprehensive high schools in the district. So that's something, but this is a tough one to grapple with, because I guess I come down on that we really need to maintain the ability to have that curation and media literacy really baked into our schools.
I was just reminded, just to add, that our library aides make about 25,000, which is similar to a classroom educational assistant, so.
Yes. I have like I guess a question that's both big picture and like very granular, and I don't even know that as a board member I need to be digging in this deep, but it's just weighing on me because we have a lot of discussions about small schools and small class sizes and whether those are equitable to teachers who have large classes, whether a small school even equals small class sizes, which often it doesn't. And so I wonder kind of about the cost of student-teacher ratios and what it means when we have classes or schools that are sort of, you and I kind of talked about this, like break-even enrollment in a class where a certain number of students kind of pays for the teacher and the principal and all of those sorts of things. Do you have an idea of like what percentage of our classes might be under that point? Is it enough to even impact the budget? Like, I don't even know how we would right-size class sizes, frankly, because like if you have 34 kids at one school, you have 2 classes. If you have 28 kids at another school, you have 1 class, and you don't know how many you're gonna have.
Right.
So is there any way to sort of right-size our classes so that we're changing our budget?
Try to answer your first question, I wouldn't be able to answer how many, classes around the district. With 28 schools and, 11,000 students, it'd be difficult for me to pull that number off the top of my head. However, Deputy Superintendent Romero and the assistant superintendents are working very closely with each individual school principal to make sure, 1, we don't exceed the CBA, and 2, if there's small classes, such as a class of 10, then there's potential for a combo class. So we're making sure that it is as equitable as possible. It's not going to be apples to apples, and we're making sure that if we have to combo, it's the last resort, but it's also staying within the CBA. So again, it's a difficult question to give you a straight answer. I think that would probably be as close without you and I meeting for about an hour to show you numbers.
I think it might take more than an hour, more than one meeting. I just wondered, NEA President Mayer had spoken to it at our last meeting, and I didn't know how much it's happening that we have a class, like a really small class versus a really large class.
Well, and I think that goes into something she mentioned at the previous board meeting. Teachers are tired. This could also be a board priority, is making sure that we find enough subs so we don't overextend our teachers. And by finding enough subs to pull in to fill those voids really allows the teachers to use their prep time properly, right? Taking the time to really prep for the next class, or taking that break, if you want to even call it that. So I think that's the first part. The second part is our job is to fill vacancies, is to recruit individuals to the district, so we don't have to ask our educators to overextend themselves to cover additional classes, to teach multiple subjects, or even cover a class of somebody calls out sick. So I think, it's a combination of a lot of variables to really solve that problem.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So a question I have related to the budget is the reimagining process. And do we envision that that's going to help inform us as we need to make major budget decisions coming up, whether it's this $9.2 million delta, or when ESSER funding goes away, is this reimagining project taking any of this into consideration, or will it have a positive impact on our budget and our decisions as we go forward? Do we know?
I can speak from my seat at the table. I think it will. I think it's also going to help us potentially attract students. And as you see in this budget presentation, students really do generate funding for the district. So as we're looking at it, we're identifying needs. But this is an ongoing process. I don't see the reimagining solving all the problems immediately. I think this is going to be an ongoing process, and maybe even through the next school year. So I think it's something that was needed. It's something that is going to help us make informed decisions and really identify areas that we can attack to help our district as a whole.
So we may be able to use that to help us.
Yes, Board Member Noble, please.
I would say the superintendent's exactly right on the attraction and really what the reimagining process is trying to do. But to answer your question very directly, is it going to produce budget recommendations in the next month? No. And it was never designed to. I mean, the design is to help the budget because there is, at this stage in the budget process, often a delta that looks kind of ugly. And then as the math gets tighter and information comes in and the PED gives the budget workshop, often the delta shrinks and it gets better. And so we hope that happens. But the reimagining process was always designed to impact probably FY25 and beyond most, because if we can do the attraction the superintendent speaks of, if we can really look at, the strengths-based sort of reinvigoration of the Santa Fe Public Schools, we should do better. But it's too early at this stage.
But it could help with our decision regarding ESSER that we're going to be faced with in 2025.
I hope so. I think that's right. I absolutely hope so.
And then talking about it's going to address classroom sizes and potentially and schools and equity and things of that nature too, which would obviously impact our budget.
It's there is a good chunk that looks at enrollment, and equity is probably the key lens from the resolution on.
Great, thank you.
Following up on that, if my math is correct on some slide somewhere, we've boosted HR with close to $300,000 for, I think, the previous 2 years, and FY24 would be the 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that is, for example, an area, as you talked about vacancies and filling vacancies in recruitment, that ESSER could hurt for FY25.
Yes, and with that investment into HR, it's done, a great job of pushing the district forward, especially that department. In the past, we've had high turnover, which created, training of new employees, trying to keep them on track. I don't think we have any vacancies at this point. Executive Director Noble, in your department? No. Yep. So it's been stable now, and that stability has really helped us transition into a new era of bringing individuals on board in a timely fashion. If you remember, I think you and I discussed in one of my first months on the job is the delay in hiring and also losing employees because districts were processing applicants much quicker than we are. And so that we've cleaned that up. We actually had a new hire orientation again yesterday, which we hired a transportation worker for that department. So again, we're continuing to add employees throughout the school year, and it's an ongoing process, but I think we've made headway over the last few years.
That's really great to hear, and I'm sure there's still work to do to use that money so that we can sustain the sustainability and changes in HR beyond next year, but I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate all the work that has been done, and I think there have been notable improvements. Thank you.
And just to know, I think this is something that had been overlooked. It's within the CBA. The HR department and Mr. Martinez's department, Business Services, are excluded from the CBA. So if employees received a raise, if they received any type of benefits through negotiations, it excluded these two departments. So as a district, we took that as a way to bolster and keep employees within both departments, and I think it's done the job. So we've kind of included it as a district priority to make sure that those employees are also valued. So within that CBA, it did not include them, and for many years, if raises were handed out, it did not include those two departments, and I think that's why we saw high turnover.
Can we go back and talk about transportation a little bit? Because I think the default, it's easy to think, what should we cut, obviously? But maybe we should think a little bit more about places where we could potentially have increased revenue. And Vice President Anderson brought it up, and I know it's something that I feel like I've been talking about for years and years and years, this idea of opening up transportation. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if we increase ridership, don't we increase revenue?
Board President Bose, that is correct. However, in order to increase eligible ridership, something has to change with boundaries or another mechanism for identifying eligible riders. So they have to be eligible riders
And
riding.
that's a state rule?
Yes. So the funding formula is dependent on riders being eligible to ride to their elementary, middle, or high school. It depends on things like mileage. There's other factors, but they have to be eligible for a ride to the school to which they are attending.
Okay. You know, it's really different. My oldest daughter went through public school in Florida, which I know I talk about a lot. They have robust magnet programs. You can apply to go, and if you're chosen by the lottery, they will bus you. And so it's confounding to me that that's not an option here, because it's not really an open district. It's incredibly inequitable to say, oh, you got into this school across town that you want to go to, but you have to be at work at 7 a.m, so you can't drive your student. But it's confounding to me. Yes, Vice President Anderson.
Yeah, it's difficult because a lot of the charters are providing transportation from across the district, and it's hard to compete with that. I asked this in a CRC meeting when I first started, so I'm sorry that I don't remember the answer, but do we provide transportation to Mandela
Yes.
and Desert Sage?
Vice President, board members, superintendent, we do. And something you said about charter schools is replicated with Mandela, and that's a hub model.
Okay.
And the reason that we can do that for Mandela and the reason charter schools are funded in that manner, the boundary is considered the entire school district.
Oh.
That's the difference. So all students attending their school who live outside of the required mileage, and it varies by elementary, mid-high, all students are considered eligible riders. That's the differentiating factor.
So if we had a lot of magnet schools that were considered, the whole district was their boundary, then we would be eligible to pay for their transportation.
That is likely correct.
Okay. It just seems it seems like a weird state thing that we're bound by, where we sort of do have a bunch of magnet schools. Like, we have schools that anyone can attend. And it's almost like we don't have zones. I mean, I know we do, because like if you live in the Acequia district, you definitely get a spot at Acequia, whether or not there's a big wait list or whatever. But like President Bose was saying, like, if we're not providing transportation, it becomes this equity issue that is an issue that it seems like we're trying to solve with the zones. And there's also this conversation that we have about creating robust neighborhood schools. Let's have everybody go to their neighborhood school, but then we have this zone issue, and without transportation, it becomes really inequitable. And it just seems like it's a little bit of a quandary that we're tied to because of the state. So maybe for our legislative priorities next year, we think about that.
Can you talk, Deputy Wagner, a little bit more about the hub thing? Is that not something that could be utilized for all schools? Because I should have corrected myself. It was, in Florida, we were responsible for taking her to her neighborhood zoned school, where a school bus picked her up and took her to her magnet program. So I wonder if there's a possible workaround.
Again, the to and from transportation funding for that special revenue source is to transport kids to and from the school in which they're boundaried, not transferred to or in which they attend by some other choice. And so unless there's some statutory loophole, which we can certainly look into, we've had plenty of conversations at the state level about ways we can be more flexible. They would not be considered eligible riders. And eligible riders can't get on the bus for a to and from trip.
Thank you.
And Deputy Superintendent Wagner, and just for clarification purposes, if they live within 1 mile of their zone school, they are not eligible, correct?
Superintendent, within 1 mile of elementary, 1.5 of middle, and 2 of high school.
And I just wanted that to be said because I get calls all the time. How come my son or daughter doesn't receive transportation to and from school?
But I think for Mandela that President Bozé is sort of right, that the transportation with the hub and spoke does get a child to their zoned school. Is that right? Or can it get can it get children all the way to any address that's a mile away, at least a mile beyond?
Ms. Noble, do you mind saying that one more time, or maybe just a little different way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, my son, who attends Mandela, has taken the bus, which took him to Santa Fe High as a hub, and then he changed buses, and he could ride to Gonzales, which is our zone school. But I don't think that I could say, come to my address in the Gonzales district.
Correct. Because basically, we could never attain that model. So think about it. If everyone else on the bus, it's like, a scatter map of all the places that they belong. We can't just, we can't door to door, more or less. That's really only a special education function if written into an IEP.
So it is really a hub and spoke model in that magnet from the zone school.
Well, I mean, to be honest, he could get off on any hub or on. There's no limits.
Got it.
People
Thank you.
use it for work or other conveniences of transport or whatnot.
Right. It doesn't have to go home the way a zoned school bus would.
Correct, but in a charter or a magnet model, you're not likely to run more than, a handful or plus of hubs.
Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to go through my pages quickly. I have a couple questions and comments, but my first comment on page 6 was just that I wanted to highlight the work done on each school district, school site's budget, and that helps, it involves a narrative explaining the identified services to improve the academic success of at-risk students. I think it's cool that work was done really closely with the school sites and so in depth this year. A quick question, which I think I'm guessing right, but on page 15, the numbers at the bottom of the page, 39.2 and 41.24, those numbers, those are FTEs? Okay.
Are we sharing those, though, across schools? Like, does every school get a full-time? Okay.
Vice President Anderson, there's, at some sites, they are shared.
And again, that's, if you're talking about right-sizing the district, it's something we have to do. Even sharing, we've talked about special teachers, from one to another. So again, it's really about being wise with our resources and our staff and utilizing them, at max capacity within their contract, nothing above and beyond. But if we have a librarian that's a full 1.0 FTE and they're at one of the smaller schools, then why not share that resource so 2 or 3 schools can really have a certified librarian, since we were on that topic, and that's just an example.
No, no, not at all. On page 22, and I don't know if there's a way to address this tonight, or if we should just ask that it be more clear in a future presentation. I know Board Member Noble asked a little bit about those numbers. I am kind of confused about how those numbers shake out. If we grew by 57 students, but the numbers are less, 1167 is less. You said 10,946. Last year, 11,190. Like, those maths are just not adding up for me.
President Bose, the number I gave, the 10,946.50, that was from the certified 80th and 120th day from the district to the PED.
Okay.
I think what is captured here is that Santa Fe Public Schools grew by 7 students between 80th and 120th day. So, you know, we could have lost membership to our 40th day and then grew back. As we mentioned, I mean, our funding is based on the year prior enrollment average of 80th and 120th day. And that's why I mentioned the estimation of the SEG is only that. It's an estimation until the PED releases their certified 910B5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that tool will clarify what you
Okay.
just asked.
Okay. Thank you. I understand it a little bit more now. Thank you.
And if I can just add, because I do want to mention it, it was one of those light bulb moments, what Board Member Noble said. She is absolutely 100% correct. As we go through this budget process, as all these documents are released and the math starts to get tighter and tighter, you could see big jumps. That reduces that delta. But she's spot on as the way she described it. I wish I could remember it. It's been a long day, so my brain is starting to become a little foggy, but the way she described it is correct, especially for the board members that are going through this new process. As we meet, it gets tighter and tighter, and usually does shrink.
And I think my last question, comment is on page 41, which Board Member Noble already brought up. That's still not really making sense, the whole debt service thing. So maybe we can talk about that more at the next meeting, why we're budgeting, but then not having to expend that. And just making sure that that's as accurate as it can be, I guess. That's it for me on the presentation. Anyone else before we move on?
I have one last question. if
Yes,
that's
please.
okay. I just wanted to clarify to make sure that I understood that this budget estimation that we have in front of us is not accounting for compaction, for changing compaction, for addressing compaction is what I should say.
You are correct. However, we were one of the few districts last year that took that into consideration when we built the salary tables. And so I don't think we're going to see that compaction that other districts may this year. Again, a lot of districts, to be quite honest, when they built their salary tables last year, PED, and Mr. Martinez can correct me if I'm wrong, only required that each cell, when you're building a salary table, needs to increase by $1. We went above and beyond that to avoid the compaction that some of those districts may see this year. Is that correct, Mr. Martinez?
Superintendent Chavez, that is correct.
That might be a correction.
I guess I have one more comment on this that I won't save till the end, but just for our next steps. Superintendent, I'm sure you are correct that thinking about this benefit options question is one of the key decisions that needs to be considered. And it sounds like there's been a bunch of math done, and we know Howard's good at math. So just to say it would be helpful to see some of that and how it plays out, because, and I appreciate Vice President Anderson's questions on take-home pay. I guess to say, I think I understand correctly, but I have a little bit of heartburn that we'll be paying people the same, but asking them to work somewhat more. And feel quite right. And this benefits piece, you know, even if the strict number of dollars that are paid by the Santa Fe Public Schools to a staff member remains the same. The benefits piece is a big piece that has long been a board priority, and how that math ends up looking, given that we have additional instructional time and these other sort of moving factors, is, I think, something that we need to dig into.
Yes, I would love a couple of those examples in writing, because I think it's really relevant, and we owe it to our staff to make sure that the budget we're passing is not going to have a negative impact on them.
Agreed. Thank you guys for both bringing that forward. And Howard did remind me, because he's the one that is working primarily on the salary tables. We may see something, one of the few areas of concern about compaction is the EAs and the special ed EAs. You know, with them moving up to $25,000 as a minimum, there was a difference between pay, and I think if you guys remember, we had an EA speaking to the board months ago, and so again, that's something we have to work on.
Thank you.
Madam President,
Yes.
so do we have a framework for moving forward? Like specifically, what is our next study session? What are we going to focus on? And this is something I've always appreciated from Board Member Noble, is she has a way to kind of keep us on track. And so are we going to focus on the potential delta at the next one? For sure, we're going to answer the question about the reserve and why we have that high reserve, but do we have, or do you need more direction from us, or?
No, I think that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. She usually tends to keep us on track and the train moving forward. But our next steps, next week is our next board meeting, and we're very hopeful that we're going to have the pieces that we don't have today to start to show a balanced budget. If we have all pieces in place, then our next steps is to come back to the board showing that type of budget that we're hoping to approve. Part of it also takes into play, and it's probably next steps, is board priorities, having those discussions. But again, we can find those missing pieces to the puzzle. We'll be able to help drive our next decision at the next board meeting, which is a week from now.
Thank you, Madam President.
Just to clarify, though, we are talking about board priorities tonight.
Yeah, I was just asking
Okay.
his question. Answering, I'm sorry.
Do you want to talk about your budget recommendations first?
Well, I think that was kind of through the presentation, but thank you,
Okay.
Board President Noble. I knew it, and I wrote it down.
Almost.
She even saw it on the paper. She pointed it out. I wrote down your positions and your name. Board President Bozay. But I think next steps would be starting to discuss board priorities. And you don't have to settle on it. This would be something to discuss, and then ongoing discussion maybe at the next board meeting to be included.
Okay. Would anybody like to jump in with board priorities? I have mine ready, if not. Yes, please.
I'd love to hear yours, but I was just looking at, and I appreciate, Superintendent, the update that you sent to us on this year's board priorities and where we are. And just to say, I think they're very good. And for me, I guess if I'm making a list, in rough order of importance, well, I don't know about that, but I should consider more on that before I list them. But really, this issue of our staff, our pay, compaction, and doing what's right, given the changes and the additional time that we're seeing, is probably the number one budget priority for me. As I look at our 2022, 2023, this year's budget priorities, again, I think they're pretty good. I'd put way up there the social, emotional, and mental health of staff and students, which was one we had from last year. The enhancement of teaching and learning to further equity, as well as the reimagining process and engagement and partnering with the community. I do want to say that both, and the HR department was another one from this year, so that it's really great, and it's not because these things become unimportant, it's because we are successful in addressing them as priorities. So, you know, I'm sort of reluctant, as HR has been something that I have seen as a pivotal factor to really making a difference in the Santa Fe Public Schools. You know, to take that off the priority list is not something I take lightly, but I think we can because of the good work that has been done by the district. I would actually, you know, I would say the same, given the reimagining process is moving along very successfully, and the engagement and partnering with the community. That remains an incredible priority for me, but I think, Superintendent, that you and the team are doing such a good job on that I don't need to put it on the list this year. Again, it remains something I care deeply about us doing, but we're talking not necessarily about operational priorities for the district, we're talking about budget priorities for FY24. So,
Yes. So my priorities, there's definitely some overlap with what you mentioned. Licensed teachers in all classrooms. We mentioned the substitutes earlier so that the teachers that are there aren't overextended. That's really important. But we also heard from the NEA president last week about classrooms that have had a sub for the whole year. And my second grader started out the year with a sub for the first 2.5 months. So I fully sympathize with that. I do think it's really important. I am grateful for the subs. That's another equity piece. That's teaching and learning and equity, and it really should not be occurring. Continuing to address the attendance. We've made great strides. I think it could go farther, so I would be reluctant to take that off of the priority list. And of course, the social emotional learning, the mental and physical well-being of staff and students. And this kind of goes back to my thought about where can we generate some more revenue and looking at those summer programs and after-school programs and building those out. We know it's a support that families need. We know that we have community partners now. We can continue to build on that and perhaps even get some more revenue from that. That's it for now. Anyone else? Yes.
Madam President, I agree with the priorities that were just stated. But one specific to my district would be, and I don't know how we could address this through the budget, is parent engagement. How do we get parents on the south side more involved? And maybe it's through offering our fields for soccer leagues or for something where we know that they have a tendency to participate more in. And so parent engagement on the south side would be mine in addition to what was already said. Thank you.
These are all, I wholeheartedly agree with every single one of these. And I think just to follow up, President Bose, on your discussion about having a licensed teacher in every classroom, and I think you said this, I'm just going to restate it, which is that it's got to be a both and with substitutes and licensed teachers in order for licensed teachers or go to I've heard of teachers just not being able to go to professional development because there aren't enough substitutes to cover the school. So I think that it's a both and I know that we talked about on Monday a great solution for substitutes and that we think we'll staff substitutes better next year. So I'm really excited for that because I think that's really going to help our retention. And then the one that I might add, and maybe it just goes, maybe it dovetails with something else so that we don't have 24 priorities, but I think in order for us to continue addressing budgets year after year, that, this was in the presentation, but that we have to focus on student recruitment. And so I would hope that within the budget, we ensure that, and I think this is covered by ESSER this next year, but that we ensure that we're covering outreach, whether that's communications about what the students or what the district is doing, because I've attended a few focus groups for reimagining, and it's really wild, like how much of what people are imagining we're already doing that people just don't know about. So making sure people know about it, but then also things like, open houses. I get postcards from Turquoise Trail. I see signs all over, enroll your kid in this school. And I'm like, no, enroll your kid in this school. But ways that we can ensure that even as the birth rate is declining, we have the lion's share of students in our district. No shade to the other schools that are operating, but we know that we offer quality education and we offer most of everything that anyone could need. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that too.
I just want to add, appreciate all the thoughts and comments, and really everything you guys have mentioned has dovetailed into reimagining. And so I think it's also an ongoing process. We're not going to solve it all in 1 year, but this is something that we need to make a priority. So again, I think it's perfectly fitting right in the work that reimagining is currently doing.
Anything else before we move along to advanced planning? All right.
Actually, sorry,
Yes.
just want to say hallelujah to the licensed teacher and sub framing of that. That's so important. So thank you for how you put that.
Framing it so nicely.
One last thing, which is a big thank you to Mr. Martinez and his team for putting this together, and to our deputy superintendents and to all of our staff. Thank you, staff, for all coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you for, as always, humoring my questions. And I really appreciate, I know that this is hard work, especially when we don't have all the numbers. So thank you for all that you've done.
Ditto. Okay, so I think we're still looking at meeting next Wednesday night. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think it correctly reflects it.
And
26th.
you will
Yep.
be here? Okay. So we'll pick up again next week. Yes?
Do we know if we'll have an executive session?
Not at this point.
Okay.
We will not have one.
And that is Wednesday night. It is not Thursday night, it is Wednesday night. So we're apparently really keeping everyone on their toes. Different days, different times. Will you be early? Will you be late? Who knows? We'll be here, and we'll talk about the budget.
I just love hanging out with you guys so much. I appreciate all these meetings back to back. They're really,
Oh, you're so welcome.
really fun.
We'll meet you on Zoom or in person. Here we are. All right, thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night and a wonderful weekend.